Hi, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ben-Yosef, and we're here to help you create teams worth leading. Anything else is just not worth it. Life is too short to do that. Today's topic is the most challenging constraints. Before we get to that, two things. I hope you've realized it by now, but if you're just listening to me in your ears, there's also a video version of this podcast if you'd like to also see me speak. So check out the link in the show notes for the YouTube link. And about a week after this episode comes out, I will be holding my next live session. Usually it's just once a quarter, so might as well check it out. It's about cracking productivity. Why can't your team improve? How to help it improve? Even if your team is improving, why not make it improve even faster? So that's the topic. 30 minutes, you can ask questions live. If you sign up, you will get the recording, even if you can't attend live. Ain't got nothing to lose. So, with that in place, let's start talking about the most challenging constraints we've got at work. And I'm just hearing a bunch of thunder. I hope it's not coming across in the audio. Crazy. We're finally getting past summer here, I'm guessing. So, the most challenging constraints. Yes, there are a bunch of constraints that we all have to deal with in our day-to-day work. Perhaps your constraint, you think the most pressing ones are your boss, the CEO, your co-founder, the investors who are holding you back from doing something. Perhaps it's budget, right? Sometimes it's very hard to do things because you do not have the budget to do them, or it would have been a lot easier had you had some more budget. Okay. Perhaps it's knowledge and experience. Maybe you're lacking some people who could have done it much faster had they had that experience was already in place in the team. Okay, I can see that. And I don't know, another challenge that you might have with constraints in the organization might be regulation. We're seeing so much talk about regulation in certain markets. I have clients who are actually waiting to see what would be the results of EU Parliament elections, US elections, to see whether that will entail a change in the regulation in their market, which I think is, quite tough. Okay, that's a real meaty sort of challenge and constraint to deal with. Nevertheless, I would say, having worked with so many people, and actually based on some personal experience, which I'm going to share in a second, this is not the hardest thing. The most challenging types of constraints I've seen people tackle are self-imposed constraints, especially if we're not aware of it. If these are constraints that we self-impose unconsciously, which happens a lot. What am I talking about? Well, I think that for so many of us, there comes a point as we're growing up, usually earlier in our careers or even earlier in our lives, that we sort of decide a bunch of things about ourselves. For example, for me, I just knew I was an introvert. And, that's, I think, a fact. I am an introvert. If you had to place me on the scale, I would almost always prefer staying at home with a very nice book and a very nice bottle of wine or a Negroni. And for me, that's a great evening, okay? That's all I need. With that sort of understanding, given that for me, fun is just sitting in front of my computer and learning a bunch of things and nerding out about a new hobby and learning so much about it and so many facts no one in the world cares about, yes, that's me. And then I realized that just because that's a preference doesn't mean that I cannot do other things. But I used to think that that was the case. I used to think I cannot, speak on stage. I cannot do this thing we're doing right now. I cannot be in any sort of leadership position because I prefer to be the coder, the person sitting at the computer and saying, leave me alone. And I realized that while that might be my natural comfort zone, that doesn't mean that I cannot do other things. That doesn't mean I can't improve. Just like, I don't know, let's go to when I was in elementary school, I couldn't speak English. When I just started my professional career, I couldn't speak English as fluently as I can now. And now, if you're a native English speaker, you might have some remarks about my English, but I think it's just, good enough to do business, which is what I'm doing. And that's something that I just had to improve over time. Just because it didn't come to me naturally doesn't mean I couldn't do it. And another thing, as an engineer, I always believed in some sort of meritocracy and just growing and showing your value in how you do the work. I had code, I had pull requests, people saw what I was doing inside the company, and therefore I gained more and more influence. However, when I started transitioning to what I'm doing now, that was a completely different sort of thing, because I was no longer working with people in a company for a while and they saw me. I had to get you somehow to realize that I was a person worth listening to. So that meant I had to start speaking about myself. I had to remind people what I do. I had to share success stories. I had to tell people I believe I was good at what I was doing and share it whenever someone gave me a good testimonial. So it's not just Aviv blowing his own horn. You can see that other people like what I'm doing. That's critical for the sort of business I'm in. And I found it very, very hard in the beginning. And with time, I realized that just because it wasn't natural doesn't mean that it's wrong and doesn't mean that I cannot do it. Yes, do I have to improve? Of course. But can I get there? Yeah, and that's what I did. I'm still not perfect. I'm not perfect at anything probably, but I'm getting better and I got help. And I realized that self-imposed constraint was critical and actually held me back for quite a while. And now let's turn this to you. So many people I work with have this thing where if you have a tech exec sort of position, if you have a tech leadership position, the tech part, you got to nail down. You've been doing it for decades. You're very good at it. But the leadership and the executive part, those might be things that you're, between you and yourself, you're telling yourself, I'm not a natural at that. I'm not good at that. I shouldn't be doing it. This is not my place. I should just be doing what the CEO tells me to do. I do not speak business. I do not understand marketing people, etc., etc., etc. Even if you don't verbalize it precisely like that, for so many people, that's the case. That's what we believe. That's what we think. And that is wrong. You can learn anything. You can see that. Anytime you see a story of someone who has transitioned from one end of the spectrum to the other, what we have to realize is that this is not something that requires amazing strengths, amazing discipline. No, it just means that we need to let go of old baggage, things that we have come to learn about ourselves many years ago and we thought were axioms, but are not. You can change. And I can tackle budget issues with clients. I can tackle whenever they have a boss that doesn't naturally let them do what they want to do, and whenever things are tough, we can tackle all of those. But if someone just refuses to believe that they possess the ability to do something, they won't learn it, they won't try it, they won't even think about any path, any option that requires them to do it. It wouldn't even be something they considered and decided wasn't relevant. That would not even be put into the thinking part of the work in the first place. It would never even be part of the choices. And when you have that sort of constraint, you're really limiting yourselves. And I'm trying to geek this so maybe you can understand better. Many years ago, I never thought I would like to do many types of engineering work. And I know so many people who say, I would never do front end, I would never do back end, I would never do mobile, I would never do data, whatever, I don't care. But those are constraints, because if you can do coding and you're really good at it, you can learn pretty much any aspect of the work and be good at it. Even if you're very good as a backend engineer and you couldn't draw a stick figure, that does not mean you could never be really good at front end. It just means that you need to learn how to focus on other types of details and learn a few extra ways of managing the work, because you have a lot of back and forth with designers and not just other coders. That's fine. But, it's not rocket science, and you could probably learn rocket science. It's not, because, that's also something that people just go to school and learn. So at the end of the day, the most challenging constraints you've got are those here in your head. And the question is, Which of these constraints are you aware of, actively working to unlock, actively working to improve at, getting help, getting a coach, reading, deciding with yourself to do some experiments? And these are all things that I might cover partly as part of my Cracking Productivity live session next week, because what's holding you back? Why can't your team improve? Oftentimes, it's because we can't improve. We're stuck and we need to move forward. So do think about that. And last thing, I want to ask you to sit down, and I always say that, I say this a lot in podcasts, I know, but here, even here as I'm recording, I always have a notebook in front of me. I always have a pen, and I always write down all sorts of things that come to mind. And I try and be aware of whenever I sense that something is hard, something is impossible, something is making me nervous, because I want to be aware of it, and I want to know whether it's something that is coming up enough and might be holding me back, and I need to work on it, maybe with my business coach, maybe with myself, maybe with my loving wife, someone who can help me. And this, I think, is one of the best ways to improve as, not just as a leader, as a person. We change. The world is changing so much around us. Why would we let something that we came to believe about ourselves decades ago hold us back for decades more? I'm not going to do that. The question is, are you? Okay, that's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. Again, a bunch of links to good stuff, I think, in the show notes. And if I've already discussed the point of realizing and verbalizing what I'm doing, we're getting to the end of 2024. My next couple of quarters are already starting to fill up, but if you would like to invest in yourself, if you'd like to have someone like me by your side to help you propel yourself forward, start 2025 with great momentum, my email's in the show notes. Let's talk. Okay, thank you. I'll be here next week.